My sister drove to help me after my seizure, then called CPS and said my kids were starving. 3 weeks later, I confirmed it was her. In her kitchen, she said yes, she would do it again. Love without accountability is not safe. A CPS investigator knocked on my door 11 days after my seizure and told me someone had reported my children were being starved. I knew before she finished the sentence who had made that call. It was my sister. The woman who had driven to us the weekend after my first seizure and stayed 3 days to help. The woman I had called before anyone else when I got the diagnosis. The woman whose voice I had needed more than anyone else's in the moment the world went frightening. It took me 3 weeks to confirm what I already knew. When I confronted her, she said yes. And what she said after yes is the reason I'm writing this, because what she said after yes is the thing that closed 34 years in a single sentence, and has not let me reopen them since. I was 11 days out from my second seizure in 6 weeks. The medication adjustment was still making the world feel slightly underwater. My husband Daniel had taken 2 weeks off work to manage the household, the children, the medical logistics, all of it simultaneously, while I moved through our home with the careful attention of someone whose neurologist has told her the floor is a genuine hazard and the next few months are unpredictable. Our children were 6 and 4. They were home that morning because Daniel had decided the school run was one variable too many while I was still in the unreliable early phase of treatment. We were a family in a medical crisis doing the specific daily work of getting through it. The investigator stood in my doorway and told me the report described children being neglected and possibly denied adequate food. I let her in. I showed her the kitchen, the refrigerator, the pantry, the children themselves. Healthy. Fed. Confused by the stranger asking them questions in their living room. The investigation took 40 minutes. She left satisfied the report was unfounded. I closed the door. I stood in my hallway with unsteady hands and I thought about who had made that call. I knew before I finished the thought. I had known, if I am honest, from the moment I opened the door. My sister Vanessa is 3 years older than me. We had built the kind of closeness that does not require proximity to maintain, the kind that survives different cities and separate adult lives and the ordinary divergences of two people who grew up in the same house and then built different worlds. She was the person I called first when I got the diagnosis. She had driven to us that first weekend, stayed 3 days, done the laundry and made the meals and sat with me in the ordinary moments because she understood that presence in crisis is not about the dramatic gestures. It is about the Tuesday afternoon when nothing is happening and someone needs another person in the room. I loved her with a specific depth of 34 years of shared history. I need you to hold that while I tell you the rest. The friction between Vanessa and Daniel had existed for years before any of this. Not dramatic friction. The quiet, consistent friction of two people who processed the world differently and who both loved me in ways that sometimes competed. Vanessa had opinions about Daniel. She thought he was not present enough. She thought his work took priority in ways I could not see because I was too close to it. I had heard versions of this across the years of my marriage and I had considered them and I had not agreed with them, because I lived inside my marriage and I had a more complete picture than the one available from the outside. I had told her this. Several times. The loop had not closed. After the first seizure, her concern about Daniel had sharpened. She had been present that first weekend and she had watched him manage the household and the children and the medical situation simultaneously, and she had interpreted his competence through the lens of every opinion she had already held about him. His steadiness had looked like absence to her. His practical focus had looked like emotional unavailability. She had said things to me in that first week that I had not had the capacity to engage with, and I had asked her to hold them until I was better positioned to hear them. She had said okay. She had gone home. And somewhere between that okay and the Tuesday morning knock, she had made a decision. I did not confront her immediately. Partly the medical situation was a genuine constraint. But I want to be honest about the other part, which was fear. Not of Vanessa. Of what the confrontation was going to confirm. Because the knowing I had before I finished the thought was the kind of knowing that can exist at a level that does not yet require action. As long as I did not confirm it directly, I did not have to decide what it meant for the 34 years. I held it in that unexamined place for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of phone calls where she asked about my recovery and I answered and she was warm in exactly the way she had always been warm. I sat on the other end of the phone and I listened and I waited. What I was waiting for was the possibility that I was wrong. I was giving the 3 weeks to the hope that 34 years was not what I was about to find out it was. At the end of 3 weeks, Daniel requested the report. It arrived with language inside it that required no interpretation. The detail was specific in a way that only someone with proximity could have provided. Someone who had been inside our home in the days after the first seizure. Someone who had stayed 3 days and seen the kitchen and the refrigerator and the children and formed conclusions she had carried home and acted on weeks later when the second seizure gave her the condition she had been waiting for. I read the report 3 times. I called Vanessa, I said I needed to see her. She said she would come to me. I said I would come to her. I needed to be the one who traveled. I needed the 2-hour drive to prepare myself for what I was going to say and for what she was going to tell me. I already understood, in the part of me that had known since the doorway, that this was not going to end with a misunderstanding resolved. I understood that I was driving towards something that would reorganize 34 years into a shape I had not yet been able to look at directly. I sat across from Vanessa in her kitchen on a Saturday in March. I put the report on the table between us without saying anything. I watched her face as she read it. What I saw was not shock. Not the horror of being confronted with something she had done and immediately regretted. I saw a face running calculations. A face that was not surprised by what it was reading because it already knew what the report said. I said, "Did you call CPS on me?" She looked up. She held the moment long enough that I understood she was deciding, not whether to tell the truth, but how to tell it. And then she said yes. The yes came without the architecture of remorse. I want to be precise about that because it is the most important thing in this story and I cannot fully convey it without you understanding what a yes without remorse actually feels like when it is delivered by someone who has known you for 34 years across a kitchen table. It was not an angry yes. It was not a defiant yes. It was not the yes of someone who had made a terrible decision and was owning it while it broke them. It was a considered yes. A yes that had been prepared. The yes of someone who had thought about this moment, had anticipated it, and had arrived at the kitchen having already decided that the decision was defensible. She said she had been worried about the children. She said she had seen things during that first weekend that concerned her. She said Daniel was not coping and the house was not functioning. She said she had not told me directly because I was sick and she had not wanted to add to my stress. She said she had thought the investigation would either confirm her concerns, in which case the children would get help, or find nothing, in which case no harm was done. I let her finish. Then I asked her what specifically she had seen that made her believe our children were being denied food. This was the question I had been carrying since the Tuesday morning and I needed to hear the answer in her voice before I decided what to do with it. She said the refrigerator had been low. She said there had been a lot of prepared and packaged food. She said the children had seemed unsettled. The refrigerator had been low because Daniel had not restocked after a week of managing a medical crisis. The prepared food was there because cooking was not the priority of a man holding a household together while his wife recovered from a seizure. The children were unsettled because their mother had had a seizure and they were 6 and 4 years old and did not have the words for what they were experiencing. Vanessa had looked at a family in crisis managing itself with everything it had and she had seen neglect. I said, "You reported my children as starving because the refrigerator was low the week after my seizure." She said she had reported a concern. She said she had not used the word starving. I pulled the report back across the table and I showed her the specific language, the language that required a caller to have provided detail. She looked at it. She said the investigator may have characterized it more strongly than she had intended. She did not apologize. She did not retract the position. I understood then that there was a version of this confrontation I had been hoping for that was not available in this kitchen. I had driven 2 hours toward the version where she understood what she had done and was broken by the understanding, the version where the 34 years reasserted themselves and she looked at me and saw the cost clearly and was devastated by it. That version required her to believe she had been wrong. She did not believe she had been wrong. She believed she had acted from concern. She believed the concern had been legitimate. She believed the action had been reasonable. The position was entirely intact. And then she said it. She said she would do it again if she believed the children were at risk. I sat with that sentence in the room for a moment before I responded to it. Not because I did not know how to respond, but because I wanted to feel the full weight of it before I did. She would do it again. Not as a threat. As a statement of position. As the clearest possible communication of how she understood her relationship to my life and my children and my authority over both. She had appointed herself, somewhere across the years I had been managing around the friction, as the person whose judgment about my household was more reliable than mine. And she was sitting across from me telling me that the appointment was still in effect. I picked up the report. I put it in my bag. I said, without raising my voice, "I'm not able to have you in my life right now." She said she understood I was angry. She said she hoped when I had some distance I would see that she had been acting from love. I said I believed she had been acting from love. I said love was not sufficient justification for what she had done. I said I needed to go. I left. The drive home was 2 hours of the specific grief that arrives when something you have been holding at the level of possibility becomes confirmed reality. Not the sharp grief of a sudden loss. The heavy grief of understanding that the loss had been present for longer than the moment of confirmation, that what I had understood as closeness had been built partly on my willingness to receive her assessments of my life as loving rather than controlling, and that the willingness had made the call possible. The call was not an aberration. It was the beliefs reaching their destination. She had believed for years that she saw my life more clearly than I did. She had acted on that belief in the most concrete way available to her. The 34 years had not prevented it. The 34 years had, in their specific configuration, enabled it. Daniel was in the kitchen when I got home. He looked at my face and he did not ask about Vanessa first. He said, "Are you okay?" About me. Not about the confrontation or the report or the position or the kitchen. About me. I thought about everything she had said across the years about his inadequacy, and I thought about that question asked in that moment, and I understood, with a completeness I had not had before, the distance between the version of him she had been describing and the person standing in my kitchen asking if I was okay. I said I would be. He said he was sorry, not for anything he had done, but for what it cost me. That is the right kind of sorry. It is the kind that does not make itself the center of what it is apologizing for. My mother called 2 days later. Vanessa had told her about the confrontation, not the full version, the version that centered her concern for the children and my response to it. My mother loves both her daughters and she responded to conflict between us by trying to find the position from which both of us could be understood sympathetically. She said Vanessa had made a mistake but had been acting from genuine concern and she hoped I would find a way to understand it from that angle eventually. I said I understood the concern was genuine. I said genuine concern did not justify the specific choice she had made about how to act on it. My mother said she hoped we could find our way back to each other. I said I did not know if that was possible. I said I was not ready to think about it yet. Both of those things were true. Vanessa reached out twice in the months that followed. The first was an email that explained her reasoning at length in the same register as the kitchen conversation. More detail. Same position. Still right. The second was a card that said she missed me and hoped I was well, floating above the thing that had produced the distance, as though the thing did not determine whether the missing could mean anything. I did not respond to either. Not as punishment. Because the position was still intact in both of them and a position that produced this once, held this firmly, defended this completely, is a position capable of producing something again. I cannot build a safe relationship around that. Not right now. Possibly not ever. My recovery has continued. 7 months without a seizure, which the neurologist calls encouraging. The medication is stable. The household is functioning with the specific steady competence of a man who was always functioning that way and whom I now have the particular clarity of a confronted truth to see more completely. The children are okay. They remember the lady who came and asked questions and they have not raised it again. My 6-year-old told me last week, in the unprompted way that children deliver the things that matter, that she was glad I was feeling better. I sat with what she said for a long time after she went back to playing. Vanessa is my sister. She will always be my sister. The 34 years are real and the love is real, and I do not doubt that the concern she had for my children was genuine. What I know now that I did not know before is that love and safety are not the same thing. That the people who love you most are sometimes the people whose particular way of loving you is the most capable of producing damage. That a person can act entirely from love and still do something that requires you to close a door. Not forever, necessarily. But for now. For the protection of the specific peace that your household requires when you are recovering from something that makes the floor a hazard and the next few months unpredictable. I closed the door. I did not want to close it. In the small hours when 34 years press against me and the grief of losing a sister arrives in the quiet way that real losses arrive, I have thought about reopening it more times than I can count. I have thought about the version of her who drove 3 hours and stayed 3 days and did the laundry and made the meals. I have missed that version with a completeness that does not get smaller. But the version who sat across from me in that kitchen, who explained her reasoning without remorse, who held the position intact while I showed her what it had cost, who said she would do it again, that version and the first version are the same person. They were always the same person. The first version was the one she showed me when showing me cost her nothing. The second was the one that appeared when she had to choose between her belief about my life and my authority over it. She chose her belief. I closed the door. And the love that knocks on your door from the outside while you are recovering from seizures, and reports your children as starving because the refrigerator was low, and sits across from you and says yes without remorse and would do it again, is a love that teaches you something you cannot unlearn. It teaches you that love without accountability is not protection. It is just another name for control. And some doors, once you understand what was standing outside them, are safer closed. Even when closing them costs you everything.